Welcome back. In today's video, we're diving into the creepiest and scariest stories that have haunted people for years. If you love spine-chilling tales, hit that like button and subscribe for more unsettling content. In 1983, a team of deeply pious scientists conducted a radical experiment in an undisclosed facility. The scientists had theorized that a human without access to any senses or ways to perceive stimuli would be able to perceive the presence of God. They believed that the five senses clouded our awareness of eternity, and without them, a human could actually establish contact with God by thought. An elderly man who claimed to have nothing left to live for was the only test subject to volunteer. To purge him of all his senses, the scientists performed a complex operation in which every sensory nerve connection to the brain was surgically severed. Although the test subject retained full muscular function, he could not see, hear, taste, smell, or feel. With no possible way to communicate with or even sense the outside world, he was alone with his thoughts. Scientists monitored him as he spoke aloud about his state of mind in jumbled, slurred sentences that he couldn't even hear. After 4 days, the man claimed to be hearing hushed, unintelligible voices in his head. Assuming it was an onset of psychosis, the scientists paid little attention to the man's concerns. 2 days later, the man cried that he could hear his dead wife speaking with him, and even more, he could communicate back. The scientists were intrigued but were not convinced until the subject started naming dead relatives of the scientists. He repeated personal information to the scientists that only their dead spouses and parents would have known. At this point, a sizable portion of scientists left the study. After a week of conversing with the deceased through his thoughts, the subject became distressed, saying the voices were overwhelming. In every waking moment, his consciousness was bombarded by hundreds of voices that refused to leave him alone. He frequently threw himself against the wall, trying to elicit a pain response. He begged the scientists for sedatives so he could escape the voices by sleeping. This tactic worked for 3 days, until he started having severe night terrors. The subject repeatedly said that he could see and hear the deceased in his dreams. Only a day later, the subject began to scream and claw at his non-functional eyes, hoping to sense something in the physical world. The hysterical subject now said the voices of the dead were deafening and hostile, speaking of hell and the end of the world. At one point, he yelled no heaven, no forgiveness for 5 hours straight. He continually begged to be killed, but the scientists were convinced that he was close to establishing contact with God. After another day, the subject could no longer form coherent sentences. Seemingly mad, he started to bite off chunks of flesh from his arm. The scientists rushed into the test chamber and restrained him to a table so he could not kill himself. After a few hours of being tied down, the subject halted his struggling and screaming. He stared blankly at the ceiling as teardrops silently streaked across his face. For 2 weeks, the subject had to be manually rehydrated due to the constant crying. Eventually, he turned his head and, despite his blindness, made focused eye contact with a scientist for the first time in the study. He whispered, "I have spoken with God, and he has abandoned us," and his vital signs stopped. There was no apparent cause of death. Whenever I was scared as a kid, my dad had always told me that in life, you should not be scared of ghosts, fear the living because they can actually hurt you. In my late teenage years, I came into some money after my father committed suicide, and I received an inheritance from him. At the time of my dad's passing, he and my mom owned a cabin up in Oregon by Mount Bachelor. The cabin had been put up for sale since my mom could no longer afford the payments, and renting it out was not covering the payments either. The cabin was set to go on the market for sale in less than a month and was in the process of finalizing all the paperwork with the realtor and lawyer. So for that month's time, the cabin was not going to be rented out any longer and was going to be vacant. I saw this as a chance to get away for a while and clear my head in light of all the things going on. I quit work, packed up my snowboarding gear, grabbed my dog, and headed up in my dad's car, that he had willed to me, to the cabin. Now this was our family cabin that my parents rented out throughout the year when we were not using it. I had keys to the cabin and also had the code for the alarms, so I did not feel the need to stop at the rental management company and advise them of my stay. This has nothing to do with the coming story, but I felt the need to mention it anyway. My first 2 days at the cabin were normal, and nothing out of the unusual happened. Spent my days playing with my dog in the snow, snowboarding, and the evenings playing PlayStation or listening to music, drinking, and smoking out on the balcony. Had already stocked up on food, cigarettes, and liquor, so I was pretty much a shut-in aside from the occasional outing to hit the slopes. With my dog as company and DVDs/PlayStation as entertainment, I was quite content and started to feel relaxed after all the drama that had preceded my outing. The cabin itself was 2 stories, The bottom story had the living room and a side guest bedroom along with a small kitchen. Upstairs had another 2 rooms along with a walkout balcony attached to the master bedroom. Most of my time there was spent either in the living room, kitchen, or master bedroom. I never ventured into the other rooms and always kept the doors leading into them shut. Open doors to dark rooms always creeped me out. Anyhow, the 3rd day came around, and I was going through my usual routine of playing with my dog. His name was Midnight, by the way, and he has also since passed, playing games, and watching DVDs. That day it was pretty heavy snowfall, so I did not feel like trekking down the hill to the main road in my car and decided to stay in. That's when things started getting a bit weird. In our area, there were only 2 other cabins adjacent to ours, maybe a block away from each other. All other cabins aside from these 2 were around a mile away from ours. Surrounding us was mostly forest and very tall pine trees, tall. This is important later on. Both these cabins were empty, and from the past couple of days, I knew that no one was currently staying there. Gave enough background and I'm going to jump to the weirdness. Around midday while outside with my dog, I noticed what looked like footprints in the snow around the area surrounding our cabin. It was still snowing, so the footprints looked semi-fresh, like someone had been there in the last 20 to 30 minutes before me. I thought that maybe someone was staying in the cabin near me that I may not have noticed, maybe they were shut-ins like me, alright. Whatever, the prints lead away from my cabin, and they disappeared in the snow towards the denser part of the trees. I disregarded the footprints and went back inside. Nighttime came around, and I decided to head to bed. My dog Midnight was lying on the bed with me when I noticed his ears perk up to a standstill/listening position. This was followed by him quickly jumping off the bed and running downstairs to the living room. I lay in bed and stayed silent. I was kind of freaked out, and could hear him moving around downstairs back and forth. After around 5 minutes, he ran back upstairs to me and started to do his doggy dance for the sign that he had to pee or that he wanted to go outside. Shit. Well, fine. I can't say no to him, so we both went downstairs to the outside driveway for him to do his thing. Only, he didn't want to pee. As soon as we were outside, he started to pull on his leash, trying to drag me to where he wanted to go. He kept looking into the dense part of the trees where the prints had been earlier. But he also kept sniffing the side of the house and looking up towards the roof. After he figured out that I was not going to go to where he wanted, he sat himself down and just stared into the darkness. A bit unusual for him, but alright, maybe there are forest animals out there that he wants to chase down. But fuck this, I did not want to chance anything, so I pulled him back inside, and we both headed back upstairs. Around half an hour later, I was lying in bed when I heard what sounded like hooves walking on my roof. It was only a series of around 6 steps, and I rationalized that it could be a pine cone falling from a tree onto the roof or maybe a kind-hearted forest animal running around. But here's the thing, the steps seemed to be spaced apart like a man-length stride. So it was really freaking me out. Midnight also heard the noise and was quick to run to the balcony screen door, expecting me to let him out. Alright, you know what, I'm a tough guy and at the time considered myself to be fairly well built and strong enough to handle myself. So I grabbed my coat and shoes along with my cigarettes and flashlight and went out onto the balcony. Fuck it, right? As soon as I was outside, I lit up my cigarette and started canvassing the roof with my light. Nothing there, and the snow on top was undisturbed. Weird, must have been all in my head? What about Midnight hearing the noise? Maybe he was feeding off my fear or paranoia. I started to calm down and relax again. By the way, I am shaking right now, and my heart is beating hard as I am typing this next bit. My eyes started to adjust to the darkness, and I kept smoking and just staring at the stars and trees next to our cabin. That's when I saw it. In a tree that was a little taller than our cabin and around 20 feet from the balcony, I saw what looked like a man crouched in a squatting position in between 2 branches. It was squatted on one branch, and its arms were extended above its head, holding onto the branch above it. Fuck me, what the fuck is that? I wasn't sure if I was really seeing this thing and stood just staring and sat there motionless. I noticed Midnight standing up and starting to pace behind me and lightly barking at the same time. The thing still did not move. I put my cigarette out and was debating on shining the light in the thing's direction, but something in my head kept screaming not to. So I walked backward to the inside of the room and pulled Midnight with me. Once inside, I locked the door and shined the light in the thing's direction, but there was nothing there. I shut the curtains to the screen door and retreated back to bed. But later on in the night I heard light tapping at the screen door, like someone was tapping on the glass with their fingers. It was consistent and did not stop for nearly an hour. Midnight seemed to stare at the door, but he wouldn't go near it anymore. The weirdest part was that I had a feeling like someone was inviting me to open the door. But at the same time, I kept hearing my dad's voice in my head telling me to stay in bed and not do it. I listened to my dad's voice and just stayed where I was. Passed out eventually and woke up in the morning, and everything was normal. It actually happened to me. 2 a.m. this past July. It's a twofer. My 1-year-old wakes up screaming. Not terribly uncommon. I go in and try to console her. Give her a bottle, nothing. She is freaked the fuck out. It happens. She'd been doing this night terror thing lately where she just woke up terrified, presumably from a nightmare. My wife takes her shift and tries to calm her down. Nothing. So around 2:30 I decide it's time for a car ride. We have 2 cars, and we took my wife's Yaris. We load the screaming baby into the car, back out of the garage, and are on our way. I know a nice 30-minute drive into the country. We live in a pretty big town, so we had to drive a little to get out of it. The roads are empty at 2:30 a.m., so I wanted to get a good long drive in to make sure the baby stayed asleep. Once we're out of town, I head down a long stretch of basically middle of nowhere road. I hang a right onto an even smaller road, 45 miles per hour speed limit, and after about a mile down this road, I see something strange. There are ditches on either side of the road filled with water 3 deep. I've biked the road myself before. I do a 25-mile loop, and I know that there isn't much shoulder room. Up ahead I can see traffic cones blocking the road off. No signs for road work. No warnings. No light at all, the cones just block the road. What? So at this point I'm expecting to be a victim of a highway robbery. My wife and I kind of look at each other a little nervously, and I realize I need to make a quick 3-point U-turn. Now, I want to preface this part with the fact that I was pretty creeped out to begin with, so this could have been my mind playing tricks on me, but I'm pretty sure that I saw what I saw. I slow the car down at the last possible second, begin to make the turn, and as my headlights pass over the ditch on the left side of the road, I see the silhouette of a person standing on the other side of the water. My wife was looking the other way to make sure no cars/psychos with chainsaws came from the other direction, so she didn't get as good a view as I did. As soon as I got that car straightened out, I went from 0 to 60 inches. Well, it's a Yaris, like a step or 2 up from a Geo, probably not terribly fast, but I had that fucker floored. We got the hell out of Dodge and went straight back home. We get home, and we go to put the, now, sleeping baby back down. As we enter her room, we notice that her closet door is open. We make it a habit of closing the closet door because mostly I, think it's creepy for her closet door to be open at night. Did we leave it open? Maybe. That's not the end of it, though. My curiosity now piqued, I decide to make sure the remainder of the doors in our house are shut and locked. The front door wasn't locked. Did we forget to lock it? Maybe. Why was the baby crying? Because she's a baby? Maybe. I slept the rest of the night sitting in a chair in the living room with the TV on while hugging the thick end of a 2-piece pool cue. I live in Osaka, Japan, and often use the subway to go to work in the morning. One day, when I was waiting for the train, I noticed a homeless man standing in a corner of the subway station, muttering to himself as people passed by. He was holding out a cup and seemed to be begging for spare change. A fat woman passed by the homeless man, and I distinctly heard him say, "Pig." Wow, I thought to myself. This homeless man is insulting people, and he still expects them to give him money? Then a tall businessman went by, and the homeless guy muttered, "Human." Human? I can't argue with that. Obviously, he was human. The next day, I arrived early at the subway station and had some time to kill, so I decided to stand close to the homeless man and listen to his strange mutterings. A thin, haggard-looking man passed in front of him, and I heard the homeless guy mutter, "Cow." Cow? I thought. The man was much too skinny to be a cow. He looked more like a turkey or a chicken to me. A minute or so later, a fat man went by, and the homeless man said, "Potato." Potato? I was under the impression that he called all fat people pig. That day, at work, I couldn't stop thinking about the homeless man and his puzzling behavior. I kept trying to find some logic or pattern in what he was muttering. Perhaps he has some kind of psychic ability, I thought. Maybe he knows who these people were in a previous life. In Japan, many people believe in reincarnation. I observed the homeless man many times and began to think my theory was right. I often heard him calling people things like rabbit or onion or sheep or tomato. One day, curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to ask him what was going on. As I walked up to him, he looked at me and said, "Bread." I tossed some money into his cup and asked him if he had some kind of psychic ability. The homeless man smiled and said, "Yes, indeed. I do have a psychic ability. It is an ability I obtained years ago. But it is not what you might expect. I can't tell the future or read minds or anything like that. Then what is your ability? I asked eagerly. The ability is merely to know the last thing somebody ate, he said. I laughed because I realized he was right. He said, bread. The last thing I had eaten for breakfast that day was toast. I walked away shaking my head. Of all the psychic abilities someone could have, that one must be the most useless. This was the most terrifying moment of my life. I was staying at my sister's small cabin near 100 Mile House, British Columbia, Canada. It was the middle of winter, and in the dead of night. I had heard about a cougar in the area that had killed some of the local farm animals. I walked outside the front of the cabin about 50 feet and was staring into the woods ahead of me, chilled to the bone by the cold but still fascinated by the level of darkness you just don't see in the city. It was completely isolated. You could see the first couple of trees from the light of the cabin, but from there on it was simply blackness. I stared into the darkness for about a minute before I heard a very loud snort coming from only a few feet ahead of me. I froze. I was certain that that moment would be my death. I heard rustling and saw a shape in the darkness slowly coming towards me. It was very quickly much larger than a cougar. I was sweating in fear and couldn't move at all. When the ship came into view, my heart just about burst, and I almost collapsed. It was her goddamn horse. One evening I was at my house alone. I was hungry, so I got up and went to the kitchen to make something to eat. I didn't have any clean bowls, so I decided to just clean all the dishes. There is a large window above my sink that looks out to my car and behind it the forest. As I was washing the dishes, I looked up and saw a coyote beside my car. It locked eyes with it and stood there staring at it for what seemed like eternity. Then it stood up and walked away on two legs exactly like a human would walk. My friends say it was probably a small bear, but it looked exactly like a coyote. I spent the rest of that night away from windows. I grew up in a townhome, backed up to a golf course with a lake. I lived in the basement by myself, with a main room and a small office, with wall-to-wall sliding door closets, important later, that I used to play video games in. Kinda creepy as a 12-year-old, but nothing out of the ordinary. When we moved in, our neighbors told my mom to watch me extra carefully this winter because the lake on the golf course freezes over and looks like normal terrain when it snows. Apparently last winter a man was walking his dog, fell through the ice, and died. So be careful and do not let me play too close in the winter. Like I said, the basement wasn't too creepy initially, but sometime during the winter, the foundation of the house cracked, and lake water started to seep in. It wasn't disastrous, just some damp carpet and a bit of mold. But that is when things started to get creepy. I would always feel like I was being watched and unwanted in the room. Like when you enter a room and someone is angry with you, you can feel it in the air. It's that vibe. So I try and ignore it until one day I'm playing SNES in the office room. The sliding closet doors start making a banging noise. Thinking it's just someone upstairs, I turn to see the doors actually moving from the sound. Like someone is trapped inside and hitting the door to get out. Bang! 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 A minute into it, it gets more desperate and loud. Bang! 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 I sat staring at the door while this door was going absolutely apeshit. After about 3 or so minutes, it begins to die down, then it stops completely. I was terrified and didn't know what to do. I sat on my couch, paralyzed, staring at the closet for about 5 more minutes until I decided that it was probably just one of my sisters fucking with me. I got up and put on my best I'm not scared face because I didn't want to give her the satisfaction. Open the door and, nothing. No one is inside. It dawned on me what just happened, and I booked the fuck out of there. I didn't sleep downstairs for the remainder of the time we lived there. I didn't make the connection until years later between the man dying in the lake, the water seeping into the basement foundation, and the banging closet. That man, trapped under the ice, hitting his fists against the surface to escape the clutches of an icy death, replaying in my room. I'm a schizophrenic, so I live in a world full of little nightmares. I, for instance, have a boogeyman, even at 34 years of age. I see him in unlit corners and dark rooms, never quite tangible, always existing in the unreal realm of my psychosis. He's very skinny with long, blunt fingers, he's shadowy and faint in color. I don't know how tall he is because he's always bunched up and ethereal. Like I said, not quite real and always on the periphery. I've been going through a lot of stress lately, so it's gotten worse, and I see him almost daily. It's not too big of a deal since I have been living with him for so many years. I honestly don't even feel fear about him anymore. I know he's just my mind's chemistry going a bit bonkers with my stress. I'm sitting in a dark room as I type this, and he's over in the corner as ever, in the corner of my eye, staring back at me. I just wish my cat would stop staring at him. My grandmother grew up in a war, and she used to care for wounded soldiers. She lived in a village where there was no electricity, so if they died, she'd have to walk all alone in the dark home to wash up. She also had a brother-in-law who was on his deathbed complaining about back pains. She decided to flip him over to clean him, and he had worms eating his back. She didn't tell him, but she cleaned him up. You guys will probably think this is mild, but this is a true story of my experience. Woke up during the night at around 2 to the sound of a wooden chair being dragged across my kitchen tiles. This went on for about 30 seconds. Frozen with fear in my bed, I didn't arise straight away. Around 10 minutes later, I got up and went to inspect what was going on. I walked through the hallway in complete darkness and silence. Eerily quiet. I went into the kitchen/dining room to find one of the chairs from the dinner table had been moved to the middle of the kitchen floor, directly underneath the light, which was flickering like it was broken or something. The chair had been moved at least 10 feet away from the table to its current spot. Oddly enough, I didn't feel utter fear at this moment, but I felt a chill at my spine. You know the kind. I was also home alone that night. This has been on my mind for months since it happened. My cousin called me yesterday, around 10 p.m., saying he needs a drink and to talk to someone, but mainly a drink, so I tell him to come home. We're good friends, even if we don't see each other much, but I had some beers in the refrigerator, and I love the guy, so even if it was late, I had no problem with it. My wife is okay with that too, but she is tired, so she locks herself in our room with our baby. Rereading that paragraph, it seems to be a setup for something to happen to them. No, the story has nothing to do with any of them. They're fine, don't worry. So, my cousin gets home, I open the door, and hit him up with a beer. When he picks it up, I notice a bandage on his middle finger. I ask what happened, he says, later, so we sit at the desk and play some poker, no bets, just to loosen up. After the second bottle, we have liter bottles down here, he starts talking. Yesterday he had the night shift at the emergency room. He works at a public hospital in Capital Federal, the capital of Argentina. It never is a good shift, stab wounds, bullet wounds, burned people, and lots of alcohol poisoning. He even witnessed a knife fight right there in the waiting room once. But last night had been quiet, and 4 hours into his shift, he had only seen one case, a guy who cut himself with a glass. So, it's 2 a.m., and a homeless lady bursts into the waiting room, screaming, "It's eating me, it's eating me," and leaving a trail of blood at her feet. The lady has to be 50 to 60 by the looks of her, and to everyone's surprise, she's pregnant. Like, really pregnant, so they think that due to her age she's having a miscarriage. They take her to the operation room, and she keeps screaming that it's eating her and thrashing about. They sedate her, as she's not letting anyone check her and see what's wrong, and they try to look for life signs of the infant. Surprisingly, the little guy is really well, better than he should be. The sedative should have put him a little bit to sleep, but he was still kicking. I'm going to refer to him as it because. Well, keep reading. They proceed to perform a C-section, really carefully because the thing was still thrashing about and moving a lot, and when they open up, there's blood everywhere. The baby is completely drenched in blood, so my cousin takes him out, the baby moving with much more strength than a newborn should have, already screaming and breathing. At first, they thought the baby had 2 umbilical cords, neither of them attached to the placenta. They checked the normal one, the one attached to its belly, and the part where it has been cut has apparently been chewed off. The other umbilical cord, a little bit below the first one, turns out to be the thing's dick, 4 inches long, almost as long as the thing's legs. The nurse who should have taken the boy ran out of the room, sickened by that, and my cousin went to clean the baby a bit. The thing's skin is totally red, they couldn't tell because of the blood, but the thing is red. And it has teeth, as my cousin learned when the thing bit him. He took off the bandage when he told me this, nasty wound, 3 suture points. My cousin puts the baby in the little crib they have waiting for it and pushes it away from the room to take it to neonatology. BTW, he was not the main doctor, there was an actual surgeon there doing the procedures. My cousin just got his degree 2 years ago, so he's usually just tending to minor cases or assisting on more serious things. The mother survived, she had been bitten from the inside. "It's eating me" was actually an accurate thing to scream. The thing is still in neo, it refuses to drink formula and shows no signs of weakening. I don't want to believe this story, I really hope it's just my cousin messing up with me, but if it's a prank, it's the first one he's ever pulled on me, and he did look scared. But fuck it, he's probably lying. Right? There's an abandoned house near some property we have. It used to belong to the Anderson family. They had 2 kids, a boy and a girl. This was 2007, they hadn't been seen for a day or two, and when a friend went to check on them, he found them all dead in the kitchen. Their autopsy results showed they all died from natural causes. Needless to say, I don't visit our property much. When I was little, about 5 years old and younger, strange things would happen in my house. For the most part, it was unexplained noises and objects moving in my bedroom while I was sleeping. Being so young, I didn't know this was unusual, and since my parents were always calm when I told them about it, I wasn't scared by these occurrences at the time. Except for one instance that still sends shivers up my spine when I think about it. This will be important later on. My dad and I are dark-skinned, the color of cinnamon. One evening, when I was around 4 years old, I was drawing/coloring in a little tent I made for myself in my bedroom by throwing some bed sheets over a little table I had. At the time, my parents and grandmother were watching TV in the living room down the hall. I was lying on my stomach under the tent with my coloring book in front of me when I felt someone grab the back of my thigh. Thinking it was my dad because it felt like his large hand, I turned to look over my shoulder and saw a man's hand retract from under the table. Except my dad is dark-skinned like me, and this hand was white as snow. I was stunned, watching this hand slowly leave my field of view, wondering who could be here in my room without me ever hearing someone come in, or leave. It felt like an eternity but was probably only about a second until I realized an intruder was in my house and I might be in danger. I screamed bloody murder, too scared to come out from under the tent, not knowing what else to do. My parents barreled down the hall and into my room looking for what was making me scream, checking the windows to make sure they were locked, they were, and searching my closet and under my bed. They found nothing, but I was inconsolable for a good while, and when I calmed down enough to tell them what happened, they tore my house apart looking for whoever touched me. Everything had been locked since my dad had gotten home from work, and my grandma had been home all day with no unusual incidents to report. We eventually moved, and I never experienced anything weird in the new house, but it still gives me the creeps to think that something or someone grabbed me right under my parents' noses and disappeared in the 5 seconds it took my parents to come running into my room. I'm a college student at a small-town university. I also work nights, 4 p.m. midnight, so double whammy. Well, our printer was broken, so one night after work, I stopped by the campus library to print off a research paper I needed the following morning. No big deal, right? I go inside, planning on staying inside 10 to 20 minutes to get this paper. I print it off, easy enough, then get my stuff together to go home. I leave the library, and I hear a rustling in the bushes as I walk past. I didn't think much of it, like I said, small town. It's a long walk to my car, though, and the rustling follows, so I pick up speed just a little bit. I wasn't too freaked because I assumed it was a cat or some birds, but I had seen enough scary movies to know those who act naively don't last too long. So I get to my car, and the first thing I noticed was that even though I unlocked it, the lights weren't coming on. I get in and turn the key, so ready to go home. And nothing. I turn the key again, and still nothing. This has never happened before because my husband takes very good care of our vehicles, and I was absolutely at a loss. I open my car door, not exactly sure what to do, maybe to check under the hood to see if there was a car genie to grant me a single wish? But as I put my foot down to step out, I stepped on something. It wasn't a leaf, that would have been absolutely fine. It wasn't a bug, hell, I can even deal with a bug. It was something hard, at least the size of a hand, and that was exactly what it felt like. As if I just stepped on someone's hand lying under my car. I screamed a little and jerked my foot back inside, slamming the door behind me. I locked the doors, completely freaked. Take a couple of deep breaths, gather myself, and open the door again. I stomp down with all my might, of course there is nothing there now. I get out of my car and, acting as calmly as I can, walk back toward the library. When I get 2 steps from my car, I hear it. A growl so low and deep, I felt it within me before it reached my ears. I kind of slowed down, wondering if I should face it but decide better. I move quickly and calmly back into the library. Just as I crossed the threshold of safety, I felt a burning scratch across the back of my leg. I immediately called my husband and had him come pick me up. He had to come inside the library to get me because, like hell, I was walking back out there alone. Sure enough, when I got home, there were 3 scratches across the back of my leg that broke the skin. However, my pants didn't have any scrapes in them. The next morning he took me to my car and checked under the hood. My battery was unplugged. Both the cords that attached to it were taken off. Somehow, someone unplugged it, probably hoping I'd take the time to check. Good for me, I had no idea what to look for. The next day I went and bought a printer and have never gone back to the library after dark. I don't believe in ghosts or anything of that nature, but there is one thing that happened to me that I can't explain. I was probably 20, still living with my parents. I don't remember what I was doing that night, but I got home really late. I unlocked my front door and entered my house. It was pitch black. All the lights were off, which was normal. My mom's the type of person that is a light sleeper and would sometimes wait up for me. As soon as I entered the dark room, I heard her say, "Oh, you were out late." I replied, "Yeah, sorry. You don't have to stay up, you know." And then I turned on the light. No one was there. I looked all downstairs for my mom, and nothing. Went upstairs to their bedroom, and there she was sleeping. She woke up and said, "You just getting in?" I still don't know what to make of this. I grew up in a small town in southern Alberta called Bragg Creek, which was an incredibly sleepy town with not much to do. Every summer since going to university, the lifers will get together for old time's sake and drive into the city to party for a night or two before we go back to our adult lives. A couple of summers ago, 7 of us went into the city to visit the country bar and had planned to go back to Bragg Creek after the bars closed and stay at a friend's house, as most of our parents had moved away after we left for college. On our way back to our aforementioned friend's house, a haze settled down over the road directly within the town limits. The last stretch of road between the town and our destination is particularly sketchy as it winds and wraps around a substantial amount of cliff face. From the back seat, I suggested to the driver that she turn on her high beams, as from my seat, I could barely see a foot in front of the van. Immediately after she turned on the high beams, a figure appeared directly in front of the van. With screeching brakes, the van stopped within 3 feet of a woman standing, head down, with arms limp beside her and back turned towards us. Obviously startled, we all deliberated what to do as the woman didn't do so much as flinch when we slid to a halt behind her. After a few moments, we crept the van up beside her and rolled down the front passenger window. The boy riding shotgun politely said, "You should really get out of the middle of the road, as you might get hurt. It's very dark and hard to see you." With that, the woman, who hadn't done as much as twitch since we discovered her, lazily raised her hand to her jaw and used it to guide her face our way. With bloodshot eyes and a slack jaw, which looked like it had been actively dislocated, she tried to facilitate a smile. I have never seen someone kick a vehicle into third gear so quickly. I still think about it often. It was by far the scariest moment I can recall. One that always gets anyone who hears it is this one. A beautiful young girl is left home alone with only her dog to protect her. On the news that night, they announced there is a serial killer on the loose in the area. Before she goes to bed, she locks all the doors and tries to lock all the windows, but the one in the basement won't lock. She decides to leave it unlocked but locks the basement door and goes to bed. Her dog takes its customary place under her bed. In the deep of night, she awakens to a dripping sound coming from her bathroom. Half awake, the girl feels the comforting lick from her dog and falls back to sleep. She reawakens to the dripping sound, reaches her hand down to the dog where she feels the reassuring lick, and falls back to sleep. Once more, she awakens to the dripping sound. She reaches her hand down and feels the lick of her dog. Now curious about the dripping sound, she gets up and slowly walks towards the bathroom, the dripping sound getting louder as she approaches. She reaches the bathroom and turns on the light. She is greeted by a horrific sight. Hanging from the shower nozzle is her dog with its throat slit open and its blood dripping into the bathtub. Something on the bathroom mirror catches her eye. She turns around. Written on the wall in her dog's blood are the words "humans can lick too." This one is real. My family never talks about it because it freaks them out to talk or even think about. When my aunt was just married to her husband, she started seeing something menacing whenever she was alone. At first she ignored it, but it would always just stare at her. It wasn't really a blur or a quick flash of the paranormal, but it was bright as day, a man with red eyes. I'm not really sure about the details because nobody wanted to tell me since I was so young. I remember a show I used to watch, Beyond Belief, did a piece about a man with red eyes, and it ended up being true. I only watched the end, but I'm sure I don't want to watch the full episode. To this day my aunt could never be alone. She's fine now though, her husband is understanding and always with her. When I was in college, I volunteered for the town rescue doing night shifts. The town I was in was pretty famous for all the Civil War battles that went on. Also, it turns out the rescue building was built on land that used to be a slave graveyard, pit. The building was built a really long time ago, back when segregation was still a thing, and they supposedly moved the remains that they found during construction, but probably not. Anyways, the crew and I are up late shooting the breeze, and some of the older members start telling us how the building is haunted. People start describing lights flickering on and off, tones randomly dropping. Several members mentioned stories where the captain's chair in the break room would just roll out of the room on flat terrain. There were 2 stories that were really freaky, though. One guy talked about how people would hear voices upstairs when no one was around. So one night they put a recorder upstairs and all hung out in the lounge area. They leave it up there for a few hours and then retrieve it to listen. At one point you could hear footsteps and someone breathing. In another story, a member's kid had come to visit with their mom and left the kid's balloon in the station. A couple of the members were outside the bay smoking. They said the balloon floated out of the bay, but instead of floating up, it remained at the same height while it floated to the sidewalk and down the street. Almost as if some ghost kid was holding onto the string. So we turn in, and I fall asleep. A couple of hours late, I hear a bunch of garbage over the radio. I couldn't understand it, waking me up. I get up, throw my boots on, and walk out of the bunk room. Go over to where we get paper run reports, and nothing comes through. Also, the tones did not come over the radio. I chalk it up to random crossover and turn back in to go to bed. I can't turn off the bunk room lights. I flick the switch several times, and nothing happens. So I crawl into bed and pull the sheets over my head like a scared child. After several minutes the lights go off, and I drift off to sleep again. Dispatch calls our phones a few minutes later, asking us if we were going to respond to the call. Had no idea we had received one. Got tons of flack from the cops when we showed up on the scene that we slept through the call. This is frightening, especially because it may have been real. The last major witchcraft trial of the modern world took place in 1880, in a wild, rural land on the tip of the South American continent. The locals claimed that a clan of warlocks inhabited a series of caves in the windswept plains of Patagonia. True or not, what follows is the account of one of the witnesses. A farmer claimed that the caverns were home to a pair of monsters that guarded the society's most treasured possessions, an ancient leather book of magic and a bowl that, filled with water, allowed secrets to be seen. When the witness entered the cave, he was then faced with two completely disfigured beings that burst out of the gloom and rushed towards him. One looked like a goat, for it dragged itself along on 4 legs, and the other was a naked man, with a completely white beard and hair down to his waist. The man was an invush, a human kidnapped in infancy, horribly maimed and disfigured, and kept in the darkness while fed on human flesh. The witness described the process of creating the invoice. When the sect needs a new invush, the council of the cave orders a member to steal a boy child from 6 months to a year old. The deformer, a permanent resident of the cave, starts work at once. He disjoints the arms and legs and the hands and feet. Then begins the delicate task of altering the position of the head. Day after day, and for hours at a stretch, he twists the head with a tourniquet until it is rotated through an angle of 180 degrees, that is, until the child can look straight down the line of its own vertebrae. There remains one last operation, for which another specialist is needed. At full moon, the child is laid on a workbench, lashed down with its head covered in a bag. The specialist cuts a deep incision under the right shoulder blade. Into the hole he inserts the right arm and sews up the wound with thread taken from the neck of a ewe. When it has healed, the invush is complete. The well to hell. Sometime in 1989, Russian scientists in Siberia drilled a borehole some 14.5 kilometers deep into the Earth's crust. The drill broke through into a cavity, and the scientists lowered some equipment to see what was down there. The temperature was more than 1,000 degrees Celsius, but the real shocker was the sound recorded by their instruments. They only captured about 17 horrifying seconds of audio before the microphone melted. Convinced that they'd heard the screams of the damned in hell, many of the scientists quit the job immediately, or so at least the story goes. Those who stayed were in for an even bigger shock later that night. A plume of luminous gas burst out of the borehole, the shape of a gigantic winged demon unfolded, and the words "I have conquered" in Russian were seared into the flames. Even though today it is considered to be a hoax, there are many who believe that this incident really happened. The well to hell urban legend remains alive to this day. This one's true. My parents had a winter house that every other weekend we would go visit up in the Shenandoah mountains. Our house was on a slight incline, and my room was in the basement, surrounded by windows and a sliding glass door. Our place was at least half a mile from any other house near us, so we wouldn't see a lot of people unless we left. As was my usual routine up there, I would watch TV until late at night, then head down to bed. One night, I headed down to the basement, and I was tossing and turning most of the night. I woke up after getting about 30 minutes of sleep, looked at my alarm clock, which read 2:45, looked out my window, and there was a man. He had a hood on, making most of his facial features impossible to distinguish, and he didn't move at all. I tried screaming, but I literally couldn't get any noise out. I can still remember that, just not getting any sound out. The man, in the most calm fashion, just slowly walked back into the woods, his movements jerking as if he were a spider or something. I must have been dreaming the part about the hooded man. I must have. I can sure as shit tell you that I didn't sleep the rest of that night, though. It had not been long since the clock chimed 10 when I was awoken in the midst of a snore. A strange tapping sound echoed from the room across the hall on this floor. My only son, the trickster I knew him to be, and the only family present that night, should have been asleep long before. I turned the knob to his room and following the repeated tapping past the door. "Johnny, are you sleeping?" I asked. "Yes." He faced me with a smile and a crescent grin. And so I reminded him of the fictional tale all parents tell their young, "Johnny, don't you know that monsters come to scare children who don't sleep?" "But Daddy, the monster is below my bed." He was giggling much more. To amuse him, I swept under, expecting nothing more than a silly trick. But something warm and foreign brushed my hand. I looked below to face my son, crying, tapping his fingers softly on the hardwood floor. "Daddy, the monster's on my bed." This actually happened to my mother. At the time, she was living in Texas with her boyfriend. I was in Florida. Anyway, she is home alone at about 8 or 9 p.m., and her boyfriend is out with friends. An elderly man comes and knocks on the door and asks for her boyfriend Mike. She says Mike isn't home and asks who this guy is. He responds, "I'm his grandfather." Now my mom knew Mike's parents and siblings but had never met his grandparents, so she invited him in, but he declined and said to just tell Mike that he stopped by to see him. She says okay and watches him walk down the stairs before closing the door and going back to doing whatever she was doing. Later on Mike comes home, and my mom tells him that his grandfather stopped by. She said that he turned very serious and said, "That isn't funny, he died years ago." So now my mom is kind of freaked out thinking it was some weirdo, but Mike showed her a picture of his grandfather, and she swears it was the same man in the photo who she spoke with at the door. So I was home with my old man once. He was in his room asleep. I got home from a late night of hanging out with friends, no drugs or alcohol, thank you, and I pulled into the driveway at what I think was either 2 or 3 in the morning. I turn the truck off, flick off the lights, and walk across the front yard to walk inside the mud room. Nothing special here. Through the kitchen towards the door to my room, which is an unfinished basement. I start sneaking down the steps to avoid waking my father, my senses heightened to listen to his breathing to see if it had changed or not. 5 or 6 steps down, I hear something hammering on the garage door that's connected to my room on the far side of the basement. I freak the hell out. I sleep with a rifle, so I thundered down the steps, grabbed a couple of bullets, which I put in my pocket before grabbing the unloaded rifle. I walk over to the garage door, trying to keep my breathing quiet lest this drug addict hear me coming. I reach the garage door. I can't see a thing out the windows at all. I flick on the outside floodlight and slowly bring my face up to the glass row of windows on the door, peering out into our expansive backyard. Nothing. Nothing at all. I sit there a minute, barefoot, before turning round and walking back to my room. I sit there with the rifle on my lap for a good half hour, just listening as my heart rate subsides. The next morning, I wake up and talk to my father about how I got in late and heard a noise that I think was our dog dropping his bone down the outside stairs. My dad says he thought the noise was me coming in through the basement. We both dismiss it until our neighbor comes over screaming and yelling that someone's dog killed all of his chickens and left them in the yard all mangled up. We go out to check on our dog, his white fur unblemished. We go over to see the chickens, and all of them have been split open as if a bear had grabbed their bodies and twisted them in half. We were both silent, and I started to sleep upstairs from then on out. This one personally happened to me. I was house sitting for this family that had a bird, a dog, and 2 cats. Since there were so many animals, I stayed the night instead of trying to transport the cats and dog with me to my place. The first night I fall asleep there, the dog wakes me up. It's barking at the front door. I was asleep on the couch in the living room, and it's 4 in the morning. Then, the door starts shaking back and forth. I can see the door handle turning as the door is shaking, so I know there is someone there. The sound stops, and I call my friend since I was worried that I was overreacting and it was possibly in my head since I had just woken up. The dog is still growling at the door. When I call my friend, she tells me to call the police. Once I get off the phone, the door starts shaking again, and the dog continues to freak out. I scream that I was calling the cops, and then silence. I get on the phone with dispatch, and as I start talking to them, the door starts shaking again. I scream once more that whoever it was needed to leave me alone and get the fuck out. The door is silent again, and it takes 20 motherfucking minutes for the cops to show up. The cops tell me that they see no signs of anyone and leave. There was nothing to do, so I went back to sleep. The next night, there was no problem. The night after that was a different story. It's about 10 o'clock, and I'm about to go to sleep. I hear something upstairs, and it's almost like a cabinet door in the bathroom opening and closing. I decided it was one of the two cats, considering I had one of them sitting in front of me. The dog goes crazy. He gets on top of the couch and starts growling at the stairs. I tell him to quit it and pull him off of the top and put him on the ground. He would only relax for a few minutes and then jump back on top of the couch and growl/bark some more. After 10 minutes of this, I went in search of the other cat. I went outside and called its name, and the other cat came up to me. This meant that there should have been nothing upstairs. I decided that it's time to leave because I didn't want to die/be raped. I take the dog with me and leave one cat inside and one outside. They have litter boxes. I locked up the house and went to sleep in my own bed. When I got back in the morning, I found both of the cats outside, and the side door was unlocked. Because of all the craziness, I took the animals with me for the rest of the week. Later on, I had learned that the family I was house sitting for had told all of their neighbors that I was going to be house sitting and alone in the house. The family had wanted them to make sure I was safe, but I believe it had put me in more jeopardy. So I was at UTSA visiting my ex-boyfriend at the time before we drove to Houston for spring break, and we were making out and fooling around in his dorm bed. I think he lived in like Chaparral Hall or something. Whoever goes there, the one where you share a room and a bathroom, and it's creepy and cold. Anyway, haha, we were fooling around, and then for some reason, both of us looked up. Mind you, the lights were off except for a lamp at the corner of the room. I am a pussy, and I am afraid of the dark, and no light came in through the windows. So we both looked up, and I swear to God, there was the shadow of a man watching us, and his position was perpendicular to us, so it couldn't have been our shadows. We got up and drove to Houston that night, no questions asked. This happened to me this past summer. My brother had gone away to work for the summer, and I had my job locally, so I was always home. My brother and I, when he is home, share a room. I remember the day clearly. It was July 10th, and this was the first night that all of this started. I was up until about midnight playing video games and eating normal teenage stuff. I went to bed close to 1, maybe 1:30. Just for some background, when I sleep on my side and in the middle of the bed, and on the floor next to my bed is always my flashlight, cell phone, and iPod, so I go to bed, and I eventually fall asleep, but I wake up a few hours later with this horrible feeling, like I just witnessed something horrible and terrifying, except I couldn't remember what I saw. So I shook it off as a nightmare, and I couldn't remember it because it was a dream. The time was 3:36 a.m. Fast forward to the next night, July 11th. I went to bed earlier because I had to work the next day, maybe around 10. But again, I woke up with a horrible feeling like the previous night, and that night I was more freaked out, just because it happened again, and when I woke up, I looked at my phone. It was 3:36 a.m. The final night this happened was July 12th. Same situation, I go to bed early, and this is the worst part. When I woke up, I was halfway down my bed, one leg off the side, the other off the end of the bed, and I had the worst feeling in my head again, the feeling of seeing the worst thing imaginable. I was freaked out. I reached down for my phone, iPod, or my flashlight, and they were gone. I reached under my bed, and they were all there, like someone or something pushed them under there on purpose so I wouldn't have anything to see or defend myself with. I dunno. I got my phone, looked at the time, and voila, it's 3:36 a.m. I'm a big guy, 6'2", 220 pounds, so it'd be hard for anyone in my family to do that. I noped out of there and went to the bathroom and stayed there, door locked and lights on for the rest of the night. Only told a few people about this, said I was imagining it. Also, I realized later that 3 + 3 + 6 = 12, which was the day I was dragged. Coincidence? Dunno. Also, I started waking up at 3:30 a.m. again, kind of freaking out. This was maybe in the 60s at my church, told to me by several older members and my grandmother. This older gentleman had been singing with the choir for years, and one Easter morning the choir was getting ready for their one last practice before heading to the sanctuary to sing for the service. Everyone was checking their music to be sure they had all the pages of the music. This older man was missing the last page of the music, and a younger member of the choir pointed it out to him. "I won't be needing it," he said. The choir went upstairs and took their place in the front of the church, in the choir loft. When it came time to sing, they all stood up. Things were going beautifully until they got to the last page of music. The old man keeled over and died at the very top of that last page of music. In the middle of the Easter Sunday service, in front of a church filled with families and children. When I started living alone, I realized that there was no need to close my door at night, so I stopped. So one night I dreamed I woke up in my bed and looked out the door. Instead of my apartment, I saw woods. Between the trees, I see a man moving around. He finally comes to the edge of my door frame and asks me to join him and follow him into the woods. I woke up when I tried to stand up. I have a nasty habit of sleepwalking, so this happens every now and then. I didn't think too much of it, because it was an obvious dream, but when I later told my family, my grandmother freaked out and called me an idiot. She said never follow anyone in a dream, or I might get lost. My house is at the end of a dead end in rural Georgia. We have a deck that spans the entire front of our house. I've always been afraid of the dark, and the empty, quiet woods surrounding our house never helped. Growing up, I would often sleep on the couch because it was closer to my parents' room. One night I have this weird half-dream, half-real image. I see a glowing light on my front porch and my mom saying, "Jake, let me in." So I, being a kind son, get up and go to the front door in a stumbling, tired state. I turn on the lights to the deck from inside, which wakes up my mom. I then begin to fumble with the locks and can't quite get them when I hear my mom behind me asking what I'm doing. I say, "Letting you in, you're out there." She says, "No, I'm in here. Let's turn the light off and go back to sleep." But I swear I saw her outside through the glass with her back turned to me. I don't know if this will be read, but I have a story my grandma told me. She had the creepiest, deadliest stories ever, but this one had others involved, so it's more believable. My grandpa used to beat my grandma a lot. They used to own a farm, and one night while everyone was drinking, my grandpa had beaten her again. She was sitting on the stairs at the back door, crying when she said she saw a really tall, really thin man, and that's the last thing she remembered. My father and uncle said they saw this thing pick up my grandma and run, and they immediately ran after them. They said he picked her up like she weighed nothing, and it ran pretty fast. They eventually got close to my grandma and whatever it was by the lake, and that's when it put my grandma down and just walked into the water, went under, and didn't come up or out again. She said that it might have felt sorry for her, but the way she said it implied that it was trying to put her out of her misery. This happened a few years back, and although other little weird things have happened since, I think this is my worst personal experience. My sister, Evelyn, who is a year younger than me, and I stayed home alone with the pretext that we were going to clean. We didn't like going to the babysitter's house. So we're cleaning, and all the lights are off because it's daytime and the sun is shining down, so we really don't need it. Anyway, we were folding clothes, almost done with the cleaning to just have the rest of the day to relax. My sister goes into the bathroom to put some things away, and I'm in the living room. As I was standing in the middle of the living room, my sister got out of the bathroom, and she had her long hair down and a white dress on. I love dresses, especially long ones, so I asked her where she found it, thinking it might be one of my mom's old dresses. She passes by me, kind of in slow motion, and she just ignores me. "Evelyn, where'd you get that dress?" "Evie? Evelyn?" "Nothing," she ignores me. So I'm looking at her dress from head to toe, and then I get to the bottom part and realize she has no legs. She's floating. By the time I realize she has no legs, this girl is turning into my room. As soon as she turns into the room, my sister pops out from the kitchen and yells, "Boo!" This happened when I and a friend were staying the night at another friend's house. We had just been hanging out all night, had some wings, and watched some football. When we decide to go to bed, we are all in the same room. I'm on the floor while my friends got the bed and the couch. This house is creepy as shit. Darker than houses should be. Shadows look like they moved, all that good stuff. Anyways, my buddy had an aluminum bat in the corner of his room near the door. As we're lying there, I see the bat start to slide up the wall. It gets a good 2 feet up and just drops straight back down. I hear my buddy whisper, "Are you guys seeing this?" We all saw the same thing and spent the rest of the night in the living room. We used to go on church camping retreats. The guy who was in charge was a great guy and used half his vacation to take us out for a week. Well, this was canoeing, and we stayed near Indian Lake in NY, carrying our canoes over trails into one lake or another and camping on the small islands. Well, one time, I grabbed the latrine tool, like a spade, and went only 100 feet outside the campsite, slightly uphill. That is all I remember. Next thing I know, they find me, say I was slack-jawed and pale. I snapped out of it and told them I was only gone for 20 minutes. They say they have been looking for 2 hours. I was on the farthest part of the island, 500 feet away on the opposite side of where I walked. Nothing eventful happened, but I felt much better when I came home. It was later to be discovered that I no longer had asthma. I know that isn't scary, but the creepy part is, when I was injured in the army, they took x-rays to see if they could see shrapnel in my chest. They stated I had an extra artery going into my heart, and why didn't I tell them about that birth defect? I stated I never knew I had one. I called up my mother, who stated, every doctor I went to said I had no problems aside from my asthma. She called up my one surviving allergist, and he stated that he would have definitely noticed and brought it up if I had an extra artery, especially in my heart. Other weird things over the years. I was a smoker but quit and now started up again, like an idiot, yet my lungs are clear, and my doctor asked if I inhaled. I said yes, and she had this puzzled look. I had a broken finger, it healed in a week with 2 popsicle sticks and gauze. My friends thought that was odd and that I might be doing more harm than good using it so early, so I got it x-rayed. Perfect heal with a small calcium layer showing where it broke. May all be odd coinky dinks, but who knows? Story told by a good family friend, Steve. In high school, Steve started dating this girl, Emily. A couple of months into their relationship, Emily's family decided to move to Ohio. Steve and Emily decided to stay together, despite the long distance. After Emily and her family relocated, Steve was sitting in class one day and experienced a phenomenon he described as a waking dream. In this strange daydream, this guy comes up and invites Steve along on a tour of this house. The random guy points out the intricacies of the home, the pictures on the mantle, the layout of the bedrooms, the pool table in the basement that had red felt instead of green. Suddenly, Steve woke up, snapping back to reality. He said once summer came, he made plans to visit Emily and her family in their new home in Ohio. As he walked up the driveway, everything looked strangely familiar, as if he had been there before. But that was impossible, he'd never been here. Yet, as he entered the home, he realized he had been there, in his waking dream. He excitedly told Emily and her parents, who were shocked, naturally, and he led them on a tour of their own house. He mentioned the red felt pool table in the basement, the pictures on the mantle, etc. The family just thought everything was strange, he was strange, and the fact that some random stranger had led him on a tour of their new home. Just weird. They sat down to dinner, and directly across from Steve was the mantle with the pictures. As he squinted to see the faces, he recognized one. It was the man from his waking dream. Hey! That's him. That's the guy who led me on a tour of the house. Instantly, Emily's mom welled up with tears and left the room. In the midst of Steve's bewilderment, Emily's dad explained that the man on the mantle, the weird tour guide, was Emily's deceased brother, who had been killed in a car accident several years before. Steve said it was a very strange meal and that he and Emily shortly broke up after that day.